I have seen the wand of the Lord Chamberlain broken into 2 pieces and placed upon the coffin of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II of England, the first of Scotland, symbolising the end of her reign. And removed from her coffin were the crown, symbolising the head of state, the orb, symbolising the head of the Church of England, and the sceptre, symbolising the head of the judiciary. And these were placed aside on cushions ready for the coronation of Charles III. And this seems a reasonable point in time to ruminate on why Queen Elizabeth II of England was quite so very good at her job. Now, there is a presupposition implied by the question itself, isn't there? Namely, that she was very good at her job. So, was she? I'm going to contend that she was, but what do I know? Am I a particular expert on these matters? Am I a student of the Constitution? Have I been avidly following the royals for my whole life? Nope. Do I have any specialist inside knowledge? Did I meet the Queen, work for people who worked for the Queen, or anything like that? No. I'm not going to claim any specialist inside knowledge, but I did spend my life in Britain, and just by so doing, you pick an awful lot up. I have experienced a lot of the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, and I and many others have observed her in action. You see, she met a lot of people, a lot of people. If you are from the Commonwealth, which is 1/3 of the world's population, it's the biggest League of Nations, and they say the friendliest, well, if you are under 70 years old, which is almost all of you, then you've known no other queen. She has been an absolute constant. In England, she's on every stamp, on every banknote, and there isn't a town or city in the land that doesn't somewhere have a plaque saying, this was unveiled by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on the occasion of something, and she cut a ribbon ever so well. So it has been speculated that she met more people than anybody else has ever met. And it's quite easy to believe that that's true. Everywhere she's gone, there have been huge crowds. And whenever she visits, say, a hospital that's just had a new ward opened, or a university that's just invented a new thing, everyone wants to meet her, so they all line up, and this is the head of the department, and this is the deputy head, and this is the manager of such and such, and this is the head of this, and these are the ward nurses, and so forth, and hello, what do you do, what's your role here? And she has to show an interest in people, and they're introduced to her by name. Of course, she can't remember them all, but she has met an awful lot of people. And this means that if you live in Britain, you know an awful lot of people who have met her, and so they're very keen normally to share their stories of having met the Queen, and no one seems to have a bad word to say about her. Now we know, don't we, that she has many political enemies and always has done. There are lots of Republicans in Britain, and this is nothing new, by the way. There are plenty of people who thought in Victorian, forward-thinking, modern Britain, and the Victorians were really proud of how modern and forward-thinking they were, that the monarchy was old-fashioned, it was medieval, and there were loads of people who were against the monarchy in the Victorian period, far more than you might realise, but nobody said anything nasty about Queen Victoria herself, the actual individual person. No, that wasn't on, and she was hugely popular. Though Queen Victoria retreated for much of her life from the public, but Queen Elizabeth II never did that. She stayed in the public eye for the whole of her 70-year reign, which is pretty extraordinary. You might think that she'd have wanted more of a break. So, with all those eyes from around the world, all those people waiting to pounce on some mistake that she made, where are the mistakes? Now, we know, don't we, that they're waiting to pounce because they've pounced so many times on the behaviour of her relatives, particularly of her children. Oh, the press was absolutely full of the Charles and Di marriage breaking down, and later the Andrew Fergie marriage breaking down, and people going to this party wearing the wrong costume, and oh, any hint of scandal was gleefully reported in the press. But the Queen? When has she ever embarrassed this country? When has she made a big gaffe? When has she made a diplomatic error? And considering how much diplomacy she has done in those 70 years, don't you think at some point someone would be able to say, well, she did make that mistake? The BBC would have pounced on it, oh, absolutely gleefully, and repeated it over and over again. And yet, where is it? Yes, there are lots of people who have stories about how she was a bit odd. For instance, I've heard a few times people say that she shakes your hand and then gives you a little very subtle push in a sort of, okay, you've had your time now, I'm moving on to the next person sort of way. But of course, that's a habit someone in her position is likely to develop, because loads of people want to carry on talking to her for a long time because she's the Queen. So she's met an awful lot of people, been to an awful lot of places, done an awful lot of things, and made an awful lot of speeches, and yeah, she doesn't seem to have put a foot wrong. And we would be hearing a lot about all the mistakes she made if she'd made them. So that suggests, doesn't it, that she was pretty good at her job. Now, constitutional monarchy works. Now, a lot of people don't like constitutional monarchy because they say, yeah, it's all very well in practice. But the thing is, it doesn't work in theory. And people who put theory above practice are, in my view, more than a little tiresome. And people who have bothered to check on these things have found pretty consistently that all around the world, the countries that are the freest, stablest, most content, best educated are constitutional monarchies. So it does seem that this constitutional monarchy idea does actually work. Now, if you live in a democracy, which you probably do because you're watching this video, then you are, I am sure, acutely aware of the drawbacks of democracy. Simply being in a democracy doesn't solve all the problems of running the country, does it? If you live in a democracy, are you absolutely happy with the good character and motives and competence of all the people who go into politics and get elected in your country? Really? No, of course you're not. But there are a lot of people who spotted quite some while ago that there were certain drawbacks of absolute monarchy as well. And so a compromise was struck. Constitutional monarchy, which is what we have today in Britain. And she practiced it right from the start, you might say, because one of the reasons she was so good at her job was that, well, she was born to it. Except she wasn't. When she was born, there was no expectation that she would become a reigning monarch. She was just going to grow up, marry a nice man, breed horses, and gallop about the countryside, having a pleasant time. And then her uncle abdicated, and then her father became, to his consternation, he really didn't want to be king. He became king, and then, so she was probably going to be queen then. And he was in failing health when she was on honeymoon, having married for love in what was, it seems, overall, in the long term, a very successful marriage with the Duke of Edinburgh. She was on honeymoon in Africa when the news came through, oh, by the way, you're queen. Now, it was when she was 21, this was before she became queen, but she knew that she was going to be, that she made a broadcast to the Commonwealth saying that she was going to dedicate her life to the duty of service to the Commonwealth. And by all accounts, it seems that she took that absolutely seriously and stuck to it for the rest of her life. Oh, I'm queen now. Cut short the honeymoon, go back to Britain, get crowned, do all the necessary. So no, she wasn't born to it, but she did take up the duty. And one of the ways I think that this duty, a symptom, if you like, of her dedication to duty, was the bizarre way she dressed. Now, if you Google for images of the Queen and you see loads of pictures of her at big public occasions, opening things, waving at big crowds and so forth, she is dressed in some very strange clothes, wearing hats of shapes that nobody else wears, and colours. My word, one thing that she's taught me is that there are actually more colours than I realised that there were. You'd see her in a shade of orange and, whoa, I did not know that shade of orange existed. Wow, that's kapow sort of weird orange or magenta or green or blue or yellow or pink. Why did she wear such weird clothes? Well, duty. If you saw her off duty, if you saw her picnicking in Balmoral, she was wearing quite muted and very ordinary clothes. But on duty, she knew that her job was to stand out. People have come a long way to see the Queen. She must not look like anybody else. And from a very long way away, there would be a dot of this weird colour. Oh, that'll be the Queen then. And that she was willing in public to make herself look so strange. It wasn't a personal expression of how she saw herself. That wasn't how she dressed to her friends when she went out riding, walking the dogs or whatever. That's not how she looked. No, it was when she was in the public eye, she put on the Queen act for her whole life. She was very consistent. And in her reign, now you might think, wow, wouldn't it be great to have a world tour? Brilliant, a world tour with loads of stuff just laid on for you, sorted out by other people. And well, yeah, I'm sure it would. You might love that once or maybe twice. How would you like to do 40 Commonwealth tours where every single day you've got to meet hundreds and hundreds of people? You've got to open half a dozen hospitals or military barracks or whatever it is they want you to open. And you've got to make formal speeches and everyone's got to be different and you've got to treat everyone exactly as they expect according to protocol, so that these people don't feel that they've been neglected and these people don't arouse the jealousy of others because they get too much of your attention, and you've got to address all the issues and deftly weave your way through some of the trickier issues. Yeah, with all those eyes on you all the time. You're on holiday. No, you're not on holiday. You're under intense and constant scrutiny. As well as a little bit of danger, of course, because out there are nutters. There's always someone out there who thinks that you should be dead and will give it a go at making that come to pass. So, yeah, 40 Commonwealth tours is amazing. And the schedules are normally described as punishing. Throughout most of her reign, she was doing something like 4 engagements a day. 4 engagements a day. Can you imagine how exhausting that must be? Admittedly, she wound down later on in her reign. The last few years, she was only doing about 1 a day. But that's an average, so you can imagine she still probably had 3 and 4 engagement days. And in all that time, she meets all those people who tell her all these things. She has the inside information from so many people. Don't forget, for instance, that every British Prime Minister would meet her most weeks and give her a personal briefing on what's been going on in Parliament, what the government is doing, what it intends to do, why it's doing what it's doing. And she's been given those personal briefings going all the way back to 1953. She has more experience of meeting heads of state and heads of government than anybody else. Can you imagine the insights that she must have? How could you go through all that, meeting all those people, and not at any point form an opinion on anything? And, here's the really tricky thing, never express an opinion on anything. Could you do it? I don't think I could. But somehow, her sticking fast to the duty of her role was something she was able to do for so long and so well that in all that time, nobody can tell you what she thought about anyone or anything. Perhaps she wrote diaries. Perhaps they will become public in years to come. I hope so, because she would have such a, from her privileged position, such a fund of knowledge and experience. It would be great that the rest of us get to benefit at least a little bit from it. But during her reign, she never opined. Now, some people will say that she was extremely brave. And one example is given, that is a piece of footage which I was expecting to see repeated on British television many times over the last week, but no, I haven't seen it, which is when she was on a big state occasion. She was riding side saddle in a military uniform down, I think it was the Mall, and there were crowds lining the road either side behind a little token iron barrier. And shots rang out from the crowd. Just back there, just behind her and to her right, a young man drew a pistol and started firing at her, and it spooked her horse. Now, it's said, we learn, don't we, from Hollywood movies that real men don't look at explosions. Well, it seems that real monarchs don't look at assassins. She didn't even look round. She just controlled her spooked horse. She was a very able horsewoman, and carried on. She didn't even speed up. She carried on at the same sedate and dignified pace. Her expression hardly changed. And so a lot of people said, wow, that's amazing bravery. Now, certainly I can say that she was no coward. Had she been a coward, she wouldn't have gone out in public anything like so many times. She wouldn't have visited Northern Ireland when the Troubles were on, against the advice of many of her security experts. But no, she was Queen of Northern Ireland, and so Northern Ireland deserved her visit and was going to get a visit from the Queen. The security people would just have to sort out the security. So she was no coward, but actually many people are capable, we learn, of acts of tremendous bravery. When in war, in the Battle of Gettysburg, in Pickett's charge, you have a lot of men, ordinary men, walking in their thousands towards very likely death, and they find that they were able to do it. They can't all have been extraordinarily brave. So, no, I wouldn't say it was bravery that enabled her to behave that way. I would say it was common sense and practice. One of the reasons that she was good at being queen was that she had an awful lot of practice at being queen. She had been surrounded for many, many years by security guards, intelligence officers, guards, police, whose job it was to keep her safe. And she knew that they were much better at it than she was. And so the best thing that she could do for them was not to add to their troubles. If there'd been a panicking queen screaming and galloping around on a panicking horse, that would have been another problem that the security services had to deal with. No, she would control the horse and carry on, take that out of their list of problems so that they can get on with their job, which is dealing with the security threat. And by the way, it was a teenager who wanted to be famous. So he was a lone nutter. And his gun was loaded with blanks. But of course, at the time, nobody knew that. And I remember on the most famous shot that has been on British television many times, you see a policeman from the other side of the road absolutely pegging it across the road, running towards danger. And it's always impressive to see people do that. So practice, yes. The Queen had an awful lot of practice at being queen. And that's one of the reasons that she was so good. Yes. For 70 years, she met every prime minister. And can you imagine how useful that must be if you are prime minister? I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. If you've just become prime minister the first time, you've no experience of what it is to be prime minister. Not really. You don't really know how much power you've got, what dangers you're going to face. You're new to the job and you're always going to be a little bit scared, surely. But can you imagine how reassuring it must be to walk into a room and talk in absolute confidence and privacy with someone who'd met everyone, who'd been briefed personally by every prime minister going back to Churchill. So if you have anything to ask about protocol, problems, whatever it is, she's almost certainly going to be able to say something along the lines of, well, Callahan said that to me, and later he found out that this, and that. So yes, your problems are very likely to have cropped up before. And one thing that everybody says the Queen was absolutely brilliant at, and again I would put this down largely to a mixture of common sense and practice, was putting people at their ease. So I'm sure that many a new Prime Minister was put at ease after meeting the Queen. Now, it seems that she took her office extremely seriously, the office of monarch, but she didn't take herself as an individual human seriously. She was able to joke. Loads of people have met her, talk about what a great sense of humour she had. And that, I'm sure, helped a great deal to keep her sane. But how many people are able to be treated as someone so special for so long without starting to believe their own publicity? This is a danger that we hear with other people. It's a trap that other people fall into again and again and again. It seems she never did. She was always aware. She never forgot that she was just a woman. And, the crown is just a big piece of jewellery. And she kept her sense of humour. And now, a friend of mine was in the Guards, and he did a stint guarding Buckingham Palace, working for the firm, that is to say, the royal family and all the machinery that surrounds it. And they met Phil the Greek, the Duke of Edinburgh. There were all these terms for all of them. Yeah. And anyway, and he was telling me that the Guards' uniforms are actually quite warm. In the middle of summer, if you're wearing one of those wool greatcoats, they're really warm, and so they usually didn't have full uniform on underneath it. So sometimes underneath that very smart greatcoat would be just a t-shirt with perhaps a rather amusing slogan written on the front. Now the Queen almost certainly knew this. And she did have a rather nice habit of inviting perhaps the captain of the guard, who's likely to be very bored, in for a cup of tea. So there he would be given a cup of tea. Oh, thank you, ma'am. And she would be making polite conversation, putting him at his ease. But she might rather mischievously say, aren't you a bit warm? And knowing that he couldn't take his greatcoat off because perhaps it wouldn't be protocol, not with what was written on the T-shirt underneath. So yes, she had a sense of humour. But the fact that she was inviting the captain of the guard in for a cup of tea was also appreciated. She talked to them as individuals. She was very, very good at talking to people as individuals. What about you? How are you getting on as captain of this, that and the other regiment? And he also talked, of course, to people who had guarded Windsor Castle. And my friend told me of a time when a lot of foreign dignitaries in a big convoy of cars were coming with the Queen to the castle for a dinner. And as they got out of their cars, there was a line of guardsmen there to greet them. And what I didn't mention was it was absolutely bucketing down with rain. Now, the Queen apparently spared not a glance, hardly noticed these guardsmen. She was just looking after her guests. She made sure that all the guests were taken into the castle, all given a drink and someone to talk to, and only when that was all sorted did she come out on her own, find the captain of the guard and give him a dressing down. And she told him, right, we're going to be coming back out of there in a couple of hours after the meal. I do not want to see a load of half-drowned guardsmen shivering in the rain. You've got to look after your men. They're going to have to clean all that kit and get it looking fantastic again for tomorrow's occasion. And they're all cold and miserable. You cannot expect guards. It's not worth it. Okay, the dignitaries, they're all going to be impressed anyway. Of course, I don't know any of her words. These are the sort of arguments she may have used, but I dare say she put it much more graciously than I'm putting it now. These dignitaries are all going to be impressed by the castle anyway. We don't need a load of guards to get wet. Yes, on paper that was perhaps your duty, but I don't want to see that again. No one should have to do that for me. And that she cared about the men, the soldiers, was something that got around, and it was because of lots of occasions like that these things would get reported. And because she cared for the men, she got great loyalty out of them. And loyalty to a monarch in an armed force is a very good thing. When you become a soldier in Britain, you swear loyalty not to the Prime Minister or any political body, but to the embodiment of the nation as represented by the monarch, who is the symbolic commander-in-chief of the army. And that's quite significant. Many historians have speculated, for example, that had the Germans not got rid of their royal family, got rid of the Kaiser after World War I, things might have been rather different, because after that the German army swore loyalty to the holder of a certain office, one Adolf Hitler. They personally swore allegiance to Adolf Hitler, not to Germany as embodied by a Kaiser. Okay, granted, the Kaiser in World War I was a warmonger, but I think it's reasonable to imagine that later Kaisers after World War I might not have been quite so warlike. And you may think, oh, well, this idea that the constitutional monarchy protects a land against tyranny and overthrow and coups and so forth it's just theoretical. It never actually happened. It has happened. It's happened a few times. In 1981, in Spain, don't forget Spain under Franco was a military dictatorship for a long time, a load of military officers went into Parliament. I know because I've seen the video footage. It was televised. They went into Parliament with guns, shots were fired, they took MPs hostage, and they were staging a military coup, but Juan Carlos put on his military hat and said, "Oi, I am the Supreme Commander of the army. I did not order this. Let those hostages go." He diffused the situation in a way that an elected official wouldn't have been able to. They were taking elected officials hostage at gunpoint. But, oh, the king has come down on the... okay, and it fizzled. So don't say, oh, it's only theoretical, it'll never happen, because it has actually happened. Now, you get from being a great queen, I think there's a sort of a virtuous cycle. From being a great monarch, you get respect. And for keeping that respect going for a while, you get respected for the fact that you've been respectable for a long time. And people respect that, so that means that you can be respectable for a bit longer, and so forth. After a while, by being respectable, you become more and more habitually and recognised as respectable. And Queen Elizabeth II definitely managed that. Because, yes, she never embarrassed us. And when I was in Guatemala a few years ago, on 2 occasions, someone came up to me and, because they knew I was British, and told me very earnestly how much respect they had for Her Majesty the Queen. And they were not saying this to be polite. They weren't just sort of, oh, I'll say hello to this Englishman, and oh, what else can I say while I'm saying hello? I like the Queen. It wasn't like that at all. No. What they wanted to do was express the respect they had for the Queen, and that I was there was an opportunity for them to do that. And they came up to me and said, with an earnestness that one never encounters in Britain, frankly, just how much they respected the Queen. And these people weren't even, they weren't even in the Commonwealth country. And there is this worldwide interest in the monarchy. Now, according to the BBC, 5.1 billion people around the world watched some of the Queen's funeral. That's 63.2% of the world's population, almost 2/3. When Charles and Di got married, I think it was roughly half the population of the world watched that. But of course, there were fewer televisions around for people to watch on in those days. More people own internet access and the like, so it's perhaps easier to reach. So I can't say that means that interest has increased, but it's still absolutely immense. Now, I can remember having a discussion with a friend of mine who was anti-monarchist, and he was saying, oh no, it's much better to have an elected president for this, that, and the. Oh, he gave the example of the president of Ireland. Oh, he said, she's very popular. I said, okay, so when the president of Ireland's child got married, did half the population of the entire planet watch? No, they didn't even televise it. The idea that amount of world interest in Britain is not an asset is absolutely flagrantly ludicrous. What a stupendous advert that funeral was. Everyone around the world gets reminded, oh yeah, Britain, wow, doesn't Westminster Abbey look amazing? One day I hope to see that place. And it was an advert for Britain, not just in the pomp and ceremony, not just in the amazing shots of the amazing architecture and countryside, but also the behaviour of the crowds. Wow, can't British people queue? And 750,000 people waited in that queue, many of them for about a day, a full day, 24 hours, just to walk past a covered coffin. Didn't even get to see the body of the Queen, it's just a covered coffin. And that show of respect and that show of queuing ability, how well behaved people were, the crowds, how respectful, how well behaved the British are. It was a good advert for this country, and an advert that you just don't get with elected representatives. Now then, you could say that she was tremendously good at the job because she was really, really intelligent. Do I have any reason to believe that the Queen was very intelligent? Actually, no. Now, there were some members of her family who were definitely very bright, but there are quite a few members of her family who really seem quite ordinary in their intelligence. And I've no particular reason to believe that she's an intellectual, or was an intellectual titan. But I can say that she definitely had a lot of social skills, and she was no fool. So she had a lot of common sense, and perhaps that's part of the reason that she was such a successful queen. Do you really want someone in that position with that much knowledge, with all that material from the mouths of all those prime ministers, not just British ones, but all the Commonwealth ones and all the other heads of state that she'd met on other diplomatic missions around the world, all that insight, all that contact with the army, with science, with everyone, do you really want someone extremely intelligent to have all that? We Brits are a little bit suspicious of intellectuals, and one way that you make a Bond villain particularly menacing is you show that he's amazingly good at chess or poker or something, that he's incredibly intelligent, because that amount of intelligence is dangerous. You don't want that in someone in the Queen's position, do you? You want someone sensible. She was sensible, yes, but not, as far as I can tell, dangerously intelligent, and that was part of what I think made her a good queen. Also, public speaking. Now, public speaking was something she had to do an awful lot of. And though I've heard people praise her public speaking, I would say that overall she was terrible at it. I mean, really quite noticeably bad. When she was in front of a camera making, as I am right now, talking straight into the lens, she was really stiff and awkward and slow and mannered. Her broadcasts to the Commonwealth at Christmas, I found them really quite difficult to watch sometimes, because she was just so uncomfortable looking in front of a camera. And when you see footage of the Queen speaking at a gathering, at a dinner or something, she always had a piece of paper, her glasses on, and she read very carefully from a very carefully prepared speech. True, she might have written the speech. I think the most common was that a draft of the speech would be written by a speechwriter for her, and then she would tweak it with a few touches of her own. But anyway, she stuck to the script and read out the words like this. And there would be jokes in these speeches, sometimes quite good jokes, and she knew how to deliver a joke, and partly because she's the Queen, everyone laughs, but she would never acknowledge the joke. Someone who was extremely good at public speaking might bounce off that audience reaction, do something with it, start riffing on it, hit with a second joke, and deliberately write in 3 jokes on the trot, or have a couple more jokes, in the back pocket just in case that one works, or some statement or something, or a way of taking advantage of how things are going down with the crowd. That is something a talented public speaker would do, but that's not what you want in a queen, not in a monarch. No, what you want is someone who will stick to the script. You want someone who doesn't put a foot wrong in 70 years of reign. Can you imagine the danger if she were a very good off-the-cuff public speaker, notes down, taking questions from the audience? What are the chances that she'd get through 70 years without, oops, shouldn't have said that, without going a little bit too far, without one joke that was just a little bit too close to the... You can see the danger. Someone who's actually bad at public speaking, not as bad as her father, by the way. Her father was so bad at public speaking, they made an entire film about it called The King's Speech. You may have seen it. He had a stammer that at least she didn't have to contend with. Yes, she was a bad public speaker, but I'm going to contend that that's one of the reasons that she made a good queen. She had a carefully, diplomatically worded speech to read out, and she just read it out. She was a reformer. That's another reason that she was a good and successful queen. She was a reformer, but most people are not aware of her as a reformer. That's because she made her many and quite wide-ranging reforms by stealth. She got on with the task of reforming the constitution, but never made a song and dance about it. That would have detracted from the majesty of her position. But she was very constitutionally aware, and it could be that you didn't realise that, for instance, she changed the law on primogeniture. So it's no longer the case in Britain that the firstborn son inherits from the monarch. It's now the firstborn child. So heir presumptive, for instance, so you could be a princess who will become queen, assuming that no son is born. That role doesn't exist anymore. Gone. Change that rule. She also, when she was lying in state, she was doing so in her own property. Westminster Hall belonged to her. And you might not know that, in fact, the whole of Westminster Palace, the whole of the Houses of Parliament, those buildings actually belonged to her. And she thought that it was constitutionally inappropriate for the monarch to own the houses in which her Parliament debated, because she could then, in theory, say, right, get out of my house. And the police would be obliged legally to enforce that and go in and turf out all the politicians from debating whatever issue it was that she didn't approve of. And perhaps a monarch shouldn't be able to do that. So she went to Harold Wilson and discussed gifting the Houses of Parliament to the nation. And she did. But did you know that? Possibly you didn't, because she reformed by stealth. Now, one thing that didn't happen by stealth was her changing the way she paid tax. That happened after Windsor Castle partly burnt down, and there was a big hoo-ha about who was going to pay for the repairs. But actually, all the plans for that were already in place. That change in the way she paid tax was going to happen, but just a couple of months later, it was just brought forward. I think that's right. It was just brought forward a little bit. So she was a reformer, and she shortened the civil list, the number of people paid by the state to act with royal duties. She shortened that very considerably. But by doing it by stealth, that made her a better queen. She was also very, and famously, gracious. Now, grace is something you want in a queen, and perhaps the best example I can think of is a piece of footage that has been repeated on British television in the last week many, many times, that of her in Northern Ireland shaking the hand of Martin McGuinness. Now, in case you don't know who Martin McGuinness was or is, he was a prominent IRA commander and a close associate of Gerry Adams, who claimed responsibility for the astonishingly savage, brutal murder of Earl Mountbatten of Burma in 1979. Earl Mountbatten was holidaying in Ireland. He wasn't surrounded by guards and security and so forth. He was showing trust in the people of the land where he was, to just holiday there. He got in a fishing boat with some friends and family and went bug, 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 and kaboom, they blew the boat up. He died horribly, covered in salt water with his legs blown off. And also dying in that same explosion were 2 children and a little old lady, and hideously maimed were lots of other people on that boat, including the identical twin brother of one of the children who died. It was such an incredibly low blow, even by IRA standards, that the world was agog, and it was universally condemned across the board. And so when Martin McGuinness became, I think he was Minister of Education at the time, at the Parliament in Northern Ireland, and the Queen went to visit, she would of course have to meet all the ministers and shake their hands, because that would be protocol. But that would mean that she would have to shake the hand of Martin McGuinness. Now, a lot of people did not want her to do that. They couldn't bear the thought of Her Majesty shaking the hands of such a, in their eyes, a vile criminal. And yet you watch that footage, and it's amazing. The smile on her face is absolutely delightful and natural, and she doesn't rush it. She's not hurried at all, but she absolutely unhesitatingly shakes his hand, and there's not a tiny there's no clue that she's thinking anything about the murder of her close kinsman and advisor and mentor to her son Charles. No. And you know, don't you, that the world's press was watching, particularly the Irish press. They were waiting for some telltale thing in her eyes, some microscopic hesitation in the movement of her hand, so they could say, she didn't really mean it. She's on this side rather than that side. But she gave them nothing. And after that very successful visit, a lot of people said, do you know, we weren't expecting this, but actually the Queen is not a divisive figure. We thought in her Britishness, she would be a divisive figure against the Irishness of the other side of the divide. And yet she ended up being a unifying figure in a way that no elected official had ever pulled off. Yes, she went to Northern Ireland as its Queen to represent everybody there of all political persuasions and religions. Could I have shaken that man's hand, or an equivalent of that man's hand? Could you have? I'm not sure, but I know she had an awful lot of practice. She was very good, I would say, at being queen. She was very gracious. Now, one of the tasks of a monarch is to thank the people who need thanking. And this is something that no elected official can ever do very well, because, well, you know, don't you, if someone has gone along, he's an elected official and is glad handing the public and getting photographed and opening a thing, he's doing it because he wants the votes. He wants your vote in the next election. It's a PR exercise. You know that the Queen isn't doing it for that reason. The Queen doesn't need any publicity. She's the most famous person who ever lived. The Queen doesn't need your vote. Nobody votes for queens. The Queen is there as an embodiment of the state. So it's not some politician who's thanking you for the photo opportunity. No, this is an embodiment of the state who has been reigning for many, many years, who has come to you to, on behalf of the entire state, thank you for whatever it is that you have done to enhance the community of the state. You've been saving lives in a hospital. You've invented something wonderful. You've done a huge amount for charity. Whatever it is, there are people that society needs to thank so that society functions better. And there's no one better than a queen or king for doing that. So she thanked the people graciously and then would go home for a cup of tea. A couple of days before she died, the prime ministership of Boris Johnson came to an end, and Boris came out in front of number 10 and said, I'm paraphrasing, something like this, sine qua non, achievement, progress, the fastest rollout of vaccines anywhere in the world, and economy, boom, wah. And he spent half his speech, at least it seemed to me, telling us just how fantastic the achievements of his government had been. The Queen never did that. In 70 years of reign, never once did we hear her say, you know that festival that went extremely well? That was me. I thought of that, and I was great in it. She never claimed credit for any idea, any proposal, the success of any event. She was thankful for, if she was on a tour, she was thankful for the people who invited her, and she was thankful that the tour went well. But she herself never claimed credit for anything. Could you be world famous and super successful at your job for 70 years and you could boast of having met everyone, every president of the United States, every, you name it, and never at any point take credit for anything? If so, you might make a good monarch. I'm going to sign off now, and I'm going to sign off in a way that Her Majesty herself used to sign her informal letters written to her friends. Tinkety-tonk, and down with the Nazis.